Hello, astronomy meteorology students. It's Mr. Johnson here to give you my last summary of our notes on the moon. I'll remind you that there are a lot of really good videos that cover the same information that I have over these last few videos. I will post a link to my library of YouTube videos that are helpful. They contain a lot more detail and do a much better job of explaining it than I might in this short amount of time. So I will turn you back to those for anything that you need extra help on. And obviously, you can always email me. Taking notes is a great idea. So you can go ahead and pause the video now if you need to go get things to take notes. I'll remind you that you have a quiz coming up covering the solar system and the moon. So with that, we will dive into eclipses. Every once in a while, there is a lining up of the moon, the sun, and the Earth. And eclipses, this happens only during either a new moon or a full moon. So we don't ever have, a first quarter eclipse. That doesn't happen. It has to be lining up because a new moon and a full moon are the two times where the sun is actually lined up. However, the orbit of the moon around the Earth is about 5 degrees off center. So that's why we don't have an eclipse every new moon and every full moon. It has to be lined up just right. So an eclipse happens when some or all of the sun's rays are being blocked from either hitting the moon or the Earth. And that's how we get our two main types of eclipses. Now, there can be sort of partial eclipses, and what a partial eclipse compared to a full eclipse, the difference between them really has to do with two words that we maybe have run across but haven't learned yet. Those two words would be umbra and penumbra. The umbra is the true shadow. It's the dark shadow that's actually caused by the sun being blocked from either hitting the Earth or hitting the moon. The penumbra is the partial shadow that surrounds the umbra. So we're going to be talking about those two. So anytime we talk about a partial eclipse, we're really talking about the penumbra blocking some of the light compared to a total eclipse, which is the umbra blocking the light. So let's dive. Well, the umbra and penumbra, those are the words that we give to that type of shadow. Now, as I just mentioned, there can be a partial or total eclipse that is caused by whether there can be either a partial or a total eclipse that really is caused by whether it's the umbra or the penumbra that is causing the darkness. So to talk about a lunar eclipse, if you look at our diagram here, we have the sun, we have the Earth, and we have the moon. Now, the Earth is quite a bit bigger than the moon, and so when the sun casts a shadow on the moon, when the sun hits the Earth and casts a shadow onto the moon, well, we can fully eclipse that moon, and it can be eclipsed for a while. Not days, but longer than a solar eclipse. And usually leading up to a total lunar eclipse, we usually have a partial leading up to it. You can see the umbra is the really true dark spot right here. And the penumbra is where there's able to be some light that goes through our atmosphere, casting kind of a not so dark shadow. Well, this can cause a blood moon. And so if a moon is partially eclipsed, like if it doesn't totally pass into the umbra of our Earth, which by the way, the sun hitting the Earth always casts that shadow. It's just a matter of whether the moon goes through it or not. If the moon goes through that penumbra but not the umbra, then that's when we can get a blood moon, this bright red big moon. And the size actually is not what causes it to be a blood moon, but rather it's the passing of light through our atmosphere and hitting the moon. Now let's compare that to a solar eclipse. Remember in the last one we had the sun, Earth, moon. Well, in a solar eclipse, we have the sun, moon, Earth. And by the way, the total solar eclipse is not tomorrow. This is an old diagram that just shows the basic idea. So what is a solar eclipse? Well, we keep talking about things being in line. We can have a solar eclipse that happens on the Earth, but here in South Dakota, we don't necessarily see it. And sometimes it's the solar eclipse is going over the ocean. So what is a solar eclipse? Well, what happens is the sun hits the moon, and the moon casts a shadow on the earth. Now, when it does that, we can have a partial solar eclipse and we can have a total solar eclipse. And the difference, again, has to do, just like we talked with the moon, it has to do with whether it's the umbra or penumbra that is casting the shadow on the part of the earth that we're on. Now, it kind of seems strange if you think about it, and I'll talk more about penumbra and the umbra in just a minute. But if you think about it, it kind of seems strange. Here we have this tiny little object that is way smaller than this larger Earth. And out of sheer coincidence, the sun happens to be 400 times, give or take, larger than the moon. But the sun is also approximately 400 times further away, which actually makes the moon and the sun about the same size. So if you remember, the moon is slowly, as it orbits the Earth, it's very slowly moving away from the Earth. So that goes to say that at some point it was closer to the Earth. You can imagine at some point the solar eclipse would have lasted a lot longer. And if we go very far into the future, we can imagine that we would never have a solar eclipse at all because, well, it'd be just too far away to totally hide the shadow, totally create a shadow. For now, at least in the foreseeable geologic time period, we will be able to see solar eclipses from time to time. So I'll remind you, the way this works is the sun hits the moon, and then the moon will either cast a total shadow on a small area, that's the total eclipse, or a partial shadow on a larger area that surrounds it. So it's just a matter of where we are in that as to whether that part of the world happens to get a partial or total solar eclipse. So just to recap, the difference between the two, umbra and penumbra has to do with the direct full shadow or a partial shadow. The lunar eclipse is when the sun, its light is being blocked by the earth, casting the moon into darkness. A solar eclipse is when the sun, its light is being blocked by the moon, causing an area of total solar eclipse where the umbra is casting a shadow, surrounded by a much larger penumbra, which will then cause there to be a partial solar eclipse. And I think I'll leave that here. If you have any questions, please let me know. And have a nice day.